a couple minutes from the top of the hour. I'm sure that folks will continue to trickle in as we move through the hour. So I think that we can go ahead and get going. First and foremost, I want to say thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy schedules. I hope that everyone is safe. I know that a number of folks throughout the state have been hit by a pretty intense storm last night and the last day. So hope that everyone is safe and dry. And yeah, I just really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here with us today and hear a little bit about a project being led by UC Berkeley in partnership with CivicWell and StopWaste that really is intended to provide local jurisdictions throughout California with the resources that they need to advance their local climate action. This, again, is a joint effort being led primarily by the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Lab at UC Berkeley, as well as CivicWell and StopWaste, who have been brought on to lead engagement and coordination with local government stakeholders throughout the state. One thing that I think is important to flag is that this effort is at a very early stage, which is kind of the whole point. We're hoping that we can shape the products and the tools produced by this project based on what we are hearing as the most prescient and highest priorities of the local governments that these tools are intended to serve. So we're really excited to share some preliminary information and a few previews at this early stage, and we're really looking forward to further engagement with all of you in the coming months, which we'll dig a little bit deeper into in just a little bit. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to go over just a few standard housekeeping items. If we can go to the next slide, please. Sure that everyone knows how to use Zoom webinars by now, but I do want to flag in case there is any tech issues or any other assistance needs that arise, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, John Vandervoort, or my colleague, Tila Combs, via the chat function if you have any issues that we can help to address. Also, really encourage folks to submit any questions for our speakers through the Q&A module at any point throughout the webinar. We're going to try to dedicate as much time as possible to Q&A, no less than 15 minutes at the end of our session together. I'm sure that many folks will have questions about some of the specifics about the tools that we're developing. Please do not hesitate to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A module, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can today. We can go to the next slide. So here is the agenda that we're going to be working through today. A few opening, welcoming remarks up at the top here, providing a brief overview of the project. We'll be spending about 15 minutes going through the specific tools that this project is developing, as well as the methodology behind some of those tools. We'll be spending some time talking through the local government engagement component of this project and how that can help shape some of the final deliverables of this effort. And then finally, we'll be hearing a little bit from the School of Journalism at UC Berkeley and how their work is going to be tied to the larger goals of this overall project. And then again, setting aside as much time for Q&A at the end as possible. We can go to the next slide. So before digging too deep into the specific items that we want to discuss with all of you today, I think it's important to do a little bit of ground setting and provide some overview about the project. So in 2023, the UC Berkeley Renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory received a grant through the UC Climate Action Research Initiative to produce a platform that provides GHG inventories to all California local governments, as well as a policy recommendations tool that identifies very specific measures that locals can take to most effectively reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. That is being led by staff of the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Lab. In conjunction with this effort, the School of Journalism at UC Berkeley is also going to produce a series of articles on climate data and action that we hope that locals can use to advance and rationalize their immediate local climate mitigation measures to their stakeholders. The tool being developed primarily by UC Berkeley staff and faculty, while CivicWell and StopWaste have been brought on to support the research team with local government engagement and the development of a comprehensive needs assessment, a local government needs assessment, which we'll dig into a little bit deeper later on. And that's really meant to help shape the tools that are being developed by the team and also establish key guardrails and key equity indicators that make sure that the tools that we're developing continue to be as relevant and useful, not only to all local governments in California, but specifically the consistently under-resourced and capacity constraint jurisdictions within our state. So the problem we all know is that local governments are essential and critical partners in reaching California's larger climate goals. We know that they have the authority and the means to realize their potential, but they often lack the necessary information and capacity to implement the necessary measures that we know to meet those larger goals. We know that the primary tool to date, the Climate Action Plan or the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, the primary tool used by local governments is oftentimes costly and oftentimes does not consistently lead to the implementation measures necessary to meet our ambitious statewide and local targets. Nevertheless, we know that this is also a critical and important tool that local governments rely on, because local governments need to be able to utilize data-driven decision-making processes in order to rationalize investments and immediate implementation measures to their stakeholders. So if we can go to the next slide. That is exactly the gap that we are hoping that the outputs of this project can address. All of the outputs of this project you can see in front of you. There's going to be a tool that provides territorial and consumption-based inventories, as well as a policy planning tool that points to, again, very specific measures that local governments can implement within their jurisdiction. There's also going to be equity indicators to ensure that everything that we are developing is accessible to all local governments in the state, as well as the outputs of the School of Journalism, which I'm excited to hear about a little later on in this presentation. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce the speakers that we have today. If we can go to the next slide. I'm very excited to share about our local government engagement and outreach component a little bit later on. I am also incredibly honored to be joined by Chris Jones, director of the Cool Climate Network at UC Berkeley. And I am also really excited to be joined by Jason Springarn-Koff, professor from the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. Really excited to hear from both of you soon. And with that, now that I think that the ground is properly set, really excited to kick it off to Chris to show really the core component of this project, which is the CAP tool, platform, as well as the methodology behind some of that. So excited to kick it over to you, Chris. Go ahead.
All right, thank you so much, John. It's such a privilege to be here today with all of you. I'm really looking forward to the question and answer portion of today's webinar. Let me just start with one overview slide. John mentioned that our 4 goals of creating these inventories, policy tools, a range of indicators, and the journalism component. You know, in the short term, and UCOP and the legislature really wants to see short-term outcomes. So we want to increase awareness and capacity to develop climate action plans and really reduce the burden on local governments in developing these plans, so that we can, you know, in the medium term, improve the capacity and have those resources shifted to developing and implementing the policies and programs. So that's going to take coordination around the state. We need to coordinate our data collection efforts, you know, coordinate the greenhouse gas inventory process, and develop a set of policy tools that are going to aid in that, and really just to kind of help lift up, you know, local government's capacity, rather than each individual community going and developing their own inventory and developing their own analysis and own planning. If you have the capacity to do that, that's great. But there's so much that we can do statewide to standardize and coordinate this process. So that's the opportunity that we see and that we're trying to contribute to. We need your help. We seek you know, your input both today, and John's going to talk about other engagement opportunities that you'll have to help support this project. I'm going to go over just a few examples of research that we've been conducting over the past 20 years almost at Cool Climate that's led us to this point, and then give you a quick demonstration of what we've developed so far. And you know, it's a great time to get your input on this process. Just as an example, we've been doing consumption-based greenhouse gas inventories now for about 15 years. And on the right, you'll see our tract level estimate of average household carbon footprints. And on the left, you'll see the sum score of the Calendvirus screen. So that is an estimate of health impacts and vulnerability. And you'll see this inverse relationship that those who are most vulnerable and exposed to emissions are the least responsible for producing them. So we seek to highlight that type of information in the tool. If you want to look into the more detailed into these consumption-based emissions, we've got a whole bunch of papers on our website, publications. You can go to coolclimate.org/scenarios and get access to these maps. One interesting thing is that when we address our greenhouse gas emissions, these disparities that I previously mentioned, if we can actually achieve our targets, those disparities will disappear. So not only will there be low emissions across the state, but we'll also simultaneously address these health and other disparities by cleaning up our fossil fuels. There's this, and I'll put these links in the chat afterwards. If you want to zoom into this article from the New York Times, you can also get detailed, consumption-based emission inventory across the whole country. And we will also put the link as well. Some of you may be familiar with our carbon footprint calculators. This is the work that we've been doing, again, actually over 20 years been doing this work. And just to give you an example of the type of tools that we develop, as soon as you enter our tools, we want to immediately give you interesting and useful information. So rather than going and filling out a bunch of blank, cells of, oh, how many miles do you drive or whatever, we're giving you already the default set of assumptions for consumption and emissions in your location. We're going to be doing the same thing for your entire community. So this is already giving you the carbon footprint of the typical US household. You can kind of go in here and change the assumptions, put in wherever you live, get a tailored greenhouse gas inventory. There we go. Let's go to Davis, North Carolina. Didn't know there was a Davis in North Carolina. And go through and then adjust the tool based on your own, personal household carbon footprint. There's a set of actions at the end where you can kind of tailor your climate solution. This is kind of a template for the type of thing that we're trying to do at the policy level as well. We also have a tool for businesses. This one I'm not ready to put the URL for you yet. There's going to be a version of this by the California Green Business Network. But we also have a similar tool for small businesses where you put in the sector that you're in and the basic information about your organization, and it'll also produce emissions inventory as well as these reports. You have to log into this this inventory, but it'll give you kind of a report with historical emissions over time. Okay. So on Cool California, which is also a partner, we've been in partnership with the California Air Resources Board for about 15 years. That, by the way, was the version of the calculator that I was showing you here, was the version that we have on coolcalifornia.org. We also have this scenarios policy tool. We published a paper on this a few years ago. Similar kind of idea is that when you put in the location, you're immediately getting the total reduction potential, in this case from broad intervention areas. So heating electrification versus VMT reduction policies. And we're not being specific here about the policies in the way that we will be in this new tool, but you can also go through and change the location, the basic assumptions. One of the things that we learned in this tool, just as a high insight, is that urbanized areas, the largest reduction potential, at least that we calculated at the time of this report, was urban infill. So find places where people have lower carbon footprints, and given the same income level, had those people lived somewhere else, their emissions would have been a lot higher. But if we add that new development to these areas, emissions statewide will be lower. Even though you're increasing emissions from that city, you are decreasing emissions statewide. However, one of the things we're finding with this new tool is population projections have really decreased since we did this tool. So since 1950, California's population has quadrupled. Starting in 2020, we expect the population of California to be stable at about 40 million and then start to decrease by the end of the century. So when we're updating our policy data, we're using the most latest population projections. I suspect that the potential of infill is going to be going down because that's only based on new housing availability. But just to give you kind of a sense of the types of tools that we develop, and you can see like Berkeley, the intervention reduction potential is going to be very different than say, Tracy is a city in the Central Valley where urban infill has a much less reduction potential. We've been developing over the past 5 years, we've been running an internship program with about a dozen interns every semester. And we've been collecting data statewide that's really been a foundation for this project. I'd like to thank StopWaste early on for supporting this, as well as Dane County, Wisconsin. I believed in this project early on and decided to help fund our internship program. So this is an example of our traditional greenhouse gas inventory, only one methodology, okay? In our tool, we're going to be having multiple methodologies, multiple data sets. This is basically just a proof of concept that we could collect statewide data historically over time and produce an inventory tool. Well, I actually think that what we've done here is a very viable method just for transportation, for example. We've taken the MFAC model at the county level for VMT, and then we've disaggregated that or allocated that to the city level based on the vehicle fleet. So as we're tracking both VMT, again, at the county level, and then the vehicle fleet. California statewide, we have not done very well at reducing VMT. No planning, we put a lot of efforts into planning at doing that. Where we're seeing a lot of the reductions right now is actually in the vehicle fleet. So being able to track the vehicle fleet over time at local levels is very important. We can see more detailed information on the vehicles, a number of EVs over time. Here, I'm just putting in the city of Berkeley. You can put in your own city and get the information if you want. But again, tracking the vehicle fleet over time and both the types of vehicles and the fuels over time is very important and for target settings and for policy. So this is, again, just one way in which we can track VMT and the vehicles. There are certainly other ways that we can do that, at least on the VMT side. And we have, origin destination, travel demand models. And to the extent that we have those available, either statewide model or individual models, happy to put those in the tool. We plan to do that. Should be available. Same with Google Insights Explorer and other transportation models. Energy, we have the same. We're collecting energy data from utilities, also from CCAs. Here's a place where we really need some help. I have a team of interns this semester just tracking down basic data on California, choice aggregation or energy, community choice energy. We want to get the carbon intensity of the energy that your community is using and to track that over time. One of our goals in the tool is not just to have data and figures, but to create narrative or smart narrative. So this is a company that I co-founded with my colleague Ben Gould to develop consumption-based inventories across the state. The reason why I wanted to show you this is these online reports are incorporating both narrative and data in a smart way. So this is populated, all of the data is populated from a database. That is one of our goals of the project, is to create narrative as well as data. So let me shift over to our first prototype. Some of this is complete with actual data, and some of it is placeholder data, but we are actively working to develop the tool. I've decided to develop this tool, of all things, in Google Sheets, okay? All of our tools, they've been developed in JavaScript, online, with HTML, but we're really making a lot of progress here and not needing those software developers to do that online tool. I can directly develop this tool and just publish it as a Google Sheet. We can also access, we have dozens of gigabytes worth of data. It's stored in other Google Sheets that we can pre-filter and send those over to the tool. So a lot of the data that you are seeing in those indicators that we have already collected, we'll be able to import directly into the Google Sheet version. So the basic idea of this dashboard is you put in your city, you put in your county, whether it's unincorporated, the state, or even the nation. And then we can adjust the emissions inventory based on your location, and it changes. Of course, we can also put in even other states. So should you be watching this webinar from somewhere else, this is also going to be available in a national level tool as well. And the idea here is that just on this most basic tool here, we're giving you the historical greenhouse gas emissions inventory from 2010 to 2020. This particular data set is from the National Emissions Inventory, supplemented with Vulcan data. And then we're projecting a business as usual baseline under policy and technology, expected changes, also population growth and other variables. And then we're reducing your emissions over time based on interaction with the policy tool down below. On the dashboard, this first page of the dashboard, you can simply click whether or not you're taking the policy, and then some kind of critical values here. We're also, the back end of this tool is a much more detailed spreadsheet where you can change the default assumptions underlying each one of the variables going into the calculation. So we have the detailed measures tab. I'm not going to show you that yet because it's not fully developed. As I said, this is a prototype. It's kind of like a half-working prototype at this point. But you'll be able to go in and change all the assumptions, just like you can, say, in the take action page of our calculator. We're also going to have an indicators dashboard, pulling in a wide range of indicators, maps, figures, and other data for your location, very similar to what our wonderful interns have been developing for us over the past 5 years. We're going to continue to update that with more updated data. We could really use your feedback on what types of information or data are most useful to you. And then the template plan, that's where we select a curated set of figures and develop smart narrative around those figures that you can use directly to implement your own climate action plan. If you want your data and even your narrative to be imported directly into our tool, very easy for us to import your own narrative. Just put it up in a Google Sheet and I can read one cell of your Google Sheet, import it into our tool, and we can customize this even on our website if you would want that type of interaction. Of course, you'll be able to download the data, all the data for the tool. It's going to be publicly available. A bunch of these other spreadsheets I'll hide, but we want to make increase your capacity to develop these plans by providing data information, but really, trying to reduce the resources that local communities are dedicating to collecting this type of information. So that's all I have to share on the tool development at this time. We have a long ways to go, but I'm excited about how much progress we've been able to make so far. And again, to me, it is about coordinating statewide our efforts to collect and process this type of information. We want to make it as useful as possible. Also, we want to be able to export the data into ClearPath or other tools that you may be using, and so that we can really integrate with your existing inventories to the extent possible. Again, you're going to be able to adjust assumptions in our tool as well. So we want to use smart tools that are fully customizable. One other thing I should mention is that we are not only tracking data over time, but by applying a consistent methodology, we're able to compare and benchmark your emissions to, let's say, your city within a county or statewide, or benchmark your emissions based on similar types of cities, and be able to track progress. We'll be able to rank cities or local governments, counties, whatever, and to provide really detailed information that I think can really help inform decision-making. And we'll be able to prioritize which actions have the most reduction potential, as well as looking at other variables that could be important, such as cost, equity, well, by the way, cost and benefits to different stakeholders, and other indicators that are relevant for climate action planning. We just need to collect and process all those in one single place. That's what I have so far.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. I mean,
Sure.
it is incredible to see what you have already been able to develop, and obviously incredibly excited to see how the tool continues to develop. That being said, there is quite a bit more to do, and there is quite a bit further for the tool to go before it was really ready for local governments to utilize it in the capacity that we are expecting them to, which is why we are bringing this conversation to all of you at such an early stage, because we are not only willing, we think that it is necessary to get as much input from all of you, from the stakeholders that are going to be utilizing these tools as early on in the process as possible, so that we continue to shape that based on the input that we get, and shape that and shape the tool on an iterative basis based on all the input that we continue to get. And I'm very excited to share a little bit more about that and what that outreach and engagement component of this project is going to look like. If we can go to the next slide. So going back to the kind of 4 primary project outputs that we identified earlier, those being the inventories themselves, the accompanying policy recommendations tool, the equity indicators, and then finally the products of the School of Journalism. I mentioned earlier that both StopWaste and CivicWell have been brought on to lead and coordinate all of that engagement throughout the project. And I think it's worth mentioning kind of exactly how those lines are going to be delineated between our 2 agencies. So StopWaste is primarily going to be coordinating with our Methodology and Policy Advisory Committee. That is a committee that has already been formed but continues to grow. If there are any subject matter experts or local government practitioners in our audience now that are interested in being more involved with that effort, I encourage you to reach out to the project team, either myself or Mia Kitahara. I'll flag our emails that you can reach out to us at the end of today's presentation. So that committee is really directly providing input on the sources of data that the inventorying tool is pulling from, as well as the very specific policies that the policy recommendations tool is prioritizing. And we're going to be working with them throughout the coming months until the project or until the tool really is finally launched, to continue to shape it and continue to shape the types of data that are being incorporated, as well as the prioritization of those specific measures and policies. So on the CivicWell side, we are leading the local government needs assessment, which we really hope can inform all of the project outputs that you see in front of you. In the next few weeks, in the coming weeks, we'll be launching this needs assessment officially. We're hoping that this can really take aim and take stock at where local governments in California are at in their climate planning process. This is not only going to provide us with the necessary data that we need to track the effectiveness of the tools that we're developing, and as we continue to make these resources available to the public, but it'll also help identify any outstanding gaps that the tools that we are developing now might not actively be addressing. And we're hoping that we're really positioning ourselves well to be responsive to those gaps as they continue to arise. So in terms of the inventories and the policy tools themselves, we're hoping that this level of engagement with our local government stakeholders throughout the state can, one, really confirm that we are utilizing data sources that are relevant to local governments and really meet the needs meet their needs and fit into their kind of standard process for developing climate action and adaptation plans. And for the policy tools, we're really hoping that we can ensure that this will ensure that we are including the highest priority policies that locals can feasibly implement within their jurisdiction. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but worth kind of fleshing out a little in further detail now. As far as the equity indicators go, we're hoping that this needs assessment can really ensure that we are engaging and incorporating the needs of California's, not just all of California's jurisdictions and its largest jurisdictions, but also those hardest to reach and most under-resourced communities, because we know that throughout the state, those rural and hard to reach communities and jurisdictions are often those with the fewest resources to dedicate to this, to the process of climate action planning. And we're hoping that this can really address the needs of those communities in particular, where there just is not as much resources and time able to be dedicated to move this work forward. And finally, we're hoping that this can really help inform the work of the journalism team, which I'm excited to hear a little bit more about from Jason in just a little bit here. As we're hoping that, the articles that are produced by the journalism team, we're hoping can be useful to local jurisdictions to help rationalize investments to their stakeholders and really move forward the necessary and immediate implementation measures that are needed to meet our larger statewide goals, both locally and regionally and across the state. So as far as what our actual approach to this local government needs assessment survey will look like and what our outreach will look like specifically, if we can go to the next slide, there's a few key arms of outreach that will be leading the development of. We'll be administering a survey that is really intended to make sure that we're highlighting the tools that are already accessible, as well as making sure that we are collecting the necessary data to track the effectiveness of the tools that we are developing. There's going to be a survey where we're asking questions like, in order for you to be able to utilize the inventory that we are producing, what methodologies and other considerations do we need to be aware of while producing that tool? Or what, just more general questions like, what types of features would you be interested in seeing in the tool that are not actively included in the draft versions of the tool? So really trying to collect as much input as possible over the next couple of months to make sure that that the tools and final products of this effort are meeting as many needs as possible. We'll also be conducting over the summer an interview series with key local government stakeholders. And the purpose is similar to the survey, but it will really allow us the opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper, particularly with those under-resourced communities that I mentioned earlier. We're planning on holding at least, hopefully more, at least 2 interviews from each of California's 9 regions. And again, prioritizing those serving low income and underserved communities. Finally, StopWaste is leading coordination of the committee that I mentioned earlier, and this committee really is consisting of subject matter experts and local government practitioners from throughout the state, and they are providing really direct input on the prioritization of the specific policies and the methodology that are being incorporated into the GHG inventorying tool and policy recommendations tool that we'll be producing. If we can go to the next slide. I think I put us a little bit behind schedule at the top of the call, so I'll try to go through this pretty fast so that we have as much time for Q&A as possible. Really outlining just kind of the roles of the advisory committee here. The advisory committee is making recommendations along both the methods and policy components of the project, and really providing direct input on the types of data that we should be utilizing and the types of policies that we should be recommending in the following areas that you see listed on the screen in front of you, those being transportation, building and energy, waste and materials, and then of course being aware of any other key areas that we might not be tracking as closely or might not be aware of at this stage. I think that we all know that building decarbonization is of course a very high priority for most jurisdictions, but really digging in a little bit deeper beyond that and prioritizing exactly what specific policies can be implemented on a local level to make sure that locals are having the greatest impact for their immediate actions and reducing their overall greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, I think with that, yeah, and just really highlighting that the purpose of this project's local engagement effort is really to create tools and resources that are as relevant and useful as possible to California's local governments, while ensuring that California's most vulnerable and under-resourced communities are prioritized and their needs are being incorporated into the tools that we developed, while allowing local governments and their stakeholders to help shape those tools along the project development process on an iterative basis, which is really the intention driving the outreach component of this project. And with that, You will all be hearing from CivicWell and StopWaste soon as we begin to circulate the survey and as we begin to host beta testing sessions and workshops in the coming months. Anyone who is interested in being more directly involved in any of these items, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be flagging my email at the end of this presentation. And with that, I'm really excited to pass it on to Jason, who is going to provide a brief overview of the type of work that the School of Journalism is going to be producing and how input from local governments can help to inform some of those final articles that we'll be making available to all of you. So with that, Jason, I think I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to have a chance to share a little bit what we have in mind. I'm a professor of journalism at UC Berkeley. We have a graduate school of journalism which produces fantastic students working in print reporting and radio and documentary film. And one of the things that we're growing here is a program specifically uncovering climate change with the goal of transforming the public's awareness of this very complex set of issues that is climate change. And we're part of this broader project really to raise awareness for the public of all of these issues that you're deeply engaged with on the community level. We're early in this, just to be clear, we are just starting up and formulating exactly what our plan will be. But at a high level, we have a team of journalists, professionals, as well as graduate students. We're going to be working with all this incredible data and all of these amazing insights that are coming out of this research and this engagement with you all to try to craft stories, craft articles that could be distributed within California or nationally, and really help people understand what's at stake in all of this. How do these issues affect them? Why is this important? What can communities and local governments do to ease the energy transition and be very equitable? So we're still formulating all of this, but we think it's a really exciting opportunity. Some of the things that we'll be looking at are questions of, for example, the energy and transportation burden. Families have to make very difficult choices between food and healthcare and other necessities. And how do these climate action plans affect people's choices? Looking at also the distribution of resources and investments across California. Where is the funding going? How many of these investments are reaching the people who need it? And we can also answer questions. I saw there was an interesting question in the chat here about what's driving discrepancies between emissions in different communities. The public is still really getting up to speed about what all of this means to them. And we're excited to create journalism. And to be clear, this is independent journalism. It's not necessarily promoting the specific research, but it's using the research to generate really interesting articles that will matter to people across California. So that's the initial idea. And we have a few questions we'd like to put forward to you as part of the survey. If we go to the next slide. Okay, sorry, this is an example, this map. I think you saw this earlier, Chris gave a look, but this is an example of the kind of journalism that we could produce using the amazing data that this team has access to. This was a New York Times piece that we can do more of this using data reporting and data visualization. And then do we have the slide of the questions? Great. So as part of this survey, we would love to hear from you on some of these questions here. What barriers are local governments experiencing in communicating the benefits of climate action? What are some of the areas of confusion among your residents and constituents? What do you struggle to communicate, and whose voices in your community should be amplified? Having a sense of this would really help our reporters in crafting what stories they do and how they tell those stories. So we're really excited to get a little bit of input from you, and that can in the coming in the next 2 years, we'll be having a lot of very interesting reporting that hopefully will bring all of this to life. I'm glad to hear in the chat that there's some enthusiasm for this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jason. And with that, I'm pretty excited to dedicate almost 20 minutes to Q&A. A lot of really great questions have already started coming in. So I would love if we can just kind of dig right in and start addressing some of those. I see one question from Ali Franzini, just about the publicly about how publicly accessible these links are. I think talking about some of the tools that you covered earlier, Chris. Would you mind just speaking about kind of timeline of making these accessible, and which resources are currently accessible versus which ones are in more of a draft form at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't want to, set expectations too high on the timeline because we want to do a really good job. The needs assessment is supposed to take place in year 1 by finishing in midsummer. And so we really don't want to develop something without your input. We want to, get that input and help it inform the tool. So, we have a number of tools that are ongoing. So I put in the chat a link to existing data. We're going to be updating those data sets, and those will be available through that platform. But the actual tool itself is going to take a while. This is a 2-year project. It ends in August of 2025. So I don't want to set expectations too high. At that point, we don't have funding for ongoing, development of the project going forward. So that's maybe something to think about. How we can make sure that some version of this continues into the future. So yeah, we have resources available. We've been developing these for 20 years. We're not going anywhere. We're going to do this to the extent that we can, the best that we can, and continue to work on all of our kind of portfolio of tools in Cool Climate. And there's other tools or behavior change tools and others that we also manage as well.
Chris, I will try not to punt every single question to you, but being that you are working so directly on this, I think that a lot of the questions coming in are relevant to your components. So you mentioned some other tools that you have available, and some that are managed by other entities. I have a question about how your calculator compares to ClearPath. I know that that's a tool a lot of folks, specifically in this audience, have relied on previously. So yeah, could you maybe just talk through about some of the differences between those two tools?
Yeah, we really wanted ICLEI as a partner, and they really wanted to partner on this. They don't have their headquarters based in California, was the only reason why they're not in our project, unfortunately. So yeah, we want to make sure at the outset that at least our data are really readily importable into or transferable over to ClearPath. And the methodologies are certainly consistent with the ICLEI community protocol. I even was one of the advisors on development of that protocol way back when, at least on the consumption side. So yeah, we want to make sure that at least the methodologies and data are compatible, and that you'll be able to import and export data from one to the other.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jason, I see one question coming in for you. I think just looking for a little bit of guidance on how locals and folks working within local government might be able to properly utilize the articles that are going to be produced by the journalism team, by your team, and how can folks utilize what you're going to be producing to support their kind of immediate advocacy efforts and climate action.
Well, I think our core mission and the work of a lot of journalism is really informing the public, giving people the information, the truth that they need to know to make good decisions. We're not specifically doing advocacy work, but we would make this work widely available one of the things that we're plugging into is called the California Local News Fellowship that is led out of the School of Journalism here, where we're working with around 40 newsrooms across California, small community organizations that are staffed with fellows that are part of our program. And we're going to look into distributing our work to all these local outlets. We may also be working with bigger outlets, and we'll have to make sure that all this work is available to you. We need to figure out what is the right publishing form. Maybe it's a newsletter. We need to figure this out, but there will be a way for you to have this journalism and do what you want with it. I hope that helps answer the question. I think the best we can do is create stories that are really engaging, really illuminating, open people's eyes, make all this incredible work seem relevant and important to them, and then you can find out how to move that to the next stage in terms of action or activism.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, Jason. Thank you. Chris, I think I have two more seemingly related questions for you. A question about, will this inventory tool help in doing the inventory itself? I'm acknowledging that a lot of jurisdictions are assigned a budget to do the inventories and eventually becomes a political issue. So maybe just a little bit of clarity around, whether or not this is meant to be providing the very direct inventory that folks can incorporate into their climate action plan, or if it is really, meant to supplement that process, and what exactly that might look like.
Well, we're absolutely, our intent is absolutely to develop CEQA compliant inventories that you can just use. So if you want to change the inventory in any way, or by the way, our tool, it's also customizable, right? So you can drop in different data sets and get different answers. It's really up to the local jurisdictions what they want to do with the data, but it is going to be an inventory that is an inventory tool for you to actually develop your inventories. Now, there may be data parts of the tool that you want to, there may be parts of an inventory that are not included in our tool that you may want to include. For example, we don't have really good data on, let's say, like local leakage rates of natural gas, or your high global warming potential, pollutants that you may have in, say, refrigerants and things like that. There may be some data sources that we can't get, but for the most part, it should be a very viable tool to conduct your inventory. And some cities have very robust, reporting platforms and staff. I work with the city of San Francisco quite a bit. They don't need us, frankly. They're doing their own thing just fine without us. But many other cities don't have that capacity, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah, and for those other cities, this tool will be pulling from the exact same data sets that consultants, or the exact same data sets that local jurisdictions would utilize in their internal process if they were developing inventories in-house. It's all very much in line with the process that already exists for those those internal inventories, as well as those developed by external consultants.
I mean, just as an example, PG&E is giving us all the data that communities get, each individually. It's just as easy for us to get the data from all the cities that it is for each city to request the data. This is really streamlining that process, and we'll just make it available to the communities. Same thing with all these other data sets that are very difficult to collect. Just going to each of the CCAs and getting the data, that only needs to be done once. Most of the data collection really just should be done at one time. We should just coordinate it and streamline it. So again, the same, as John mentioned, the same methods we're going to be, that consultants apply, that cities apply, as we're applying.
Yeah, so continuing to dig in a little bit on this, I see a question about will there be very specifics, the specifics of the tool. Will there be a preserving / reduction of green spaces in urban areas component to the tools? Recognizing that decrease of green spaces and its effect to the climate overall.
So we're prioritizing initially the priority intervention areas that are in the scoping plan for CARB. building decarbonization, VMT reduction, renewable energy. There is working lands, green space. We have data and measures through CAPCOA to work on the, as potential measures, but they're not initially prioritized. But any measure that we can quantify, absolutely, we'll put it in. And especially that this is an ongoing project. Once you have the inventories and you have the data on the background assumptions, really easy for us to add new measures and to the tool. So,
yeah.
That brings me up to another question that somebody brought up, and it's not misinformation, but I think everybody in this room and everybody in your community has a different idea about which measures have the most reduction potential. And often those voices that are heard the most are not necessarily the most knowledgeable. And the resources that are distributed within communities may not be distributed in a way that's reflective of what the largest opportunities are. And we have to, of course, look at the trade-offs, co-benefits of these opportunities. But I have a tool that really highlights what really is important versus something that is a fraction of the reduction potential at maybe more cost, can really help shape the discussion, I think, in an important way. And that's what we're all going to be learning. I'll be learning as well, along with all of you, about what the outcomes of the work will be.
A lot of really great questions coming in that I want to make sure we get to as many of them as possible. So I have one question. I'm no expert on GHG inventories, but it's my understanding that incorporating consumption-based data into a standard inventory creates the risk of double counting some emissions.
Yes.
Is that correct? And if so, how do you recommend using the consumption-based information? Can it go into a cap with those caveats?
Yeah, so consumption is just a different lens. This is the way that we've described it in the community protocol. It absolutely does double count emissions from your traditional inventory. To me, the extent that we double count or triple count or quadruple count can be a good thing. It depends on what the purpose is, right? So we are counting on a consumption basis all emissions globally that are relevant to household consumption or consumption of local governments, regardless of where those emissions occur. So some of those consumption emissions are going to take place by businesses in your community. And then the households in a consumption-based emissions inventory are kind of taking responsibility, or at least the attribution goes to the people who buy the products. And then simultaneously, if you have a traditional, territorial or sector-based inventory, that's going to be counted there on the business side. So yeah, they're double counted. They're different purposes. But yeah, I'm all for double counting. I don't have a problem with it. It depends. You just have to be really clear what the boundaries are and what kind of the goals are.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. A question was posed kind of earlier on in the meeting that I want to make sure we get to. Oh, here it is. Thanks for the overview of the tools, Chris. Can you talk about what equity indicators you have identified? I'm happy to chime in there wherever helpful, and how those are displayed in the tools so that we can really use the centering of equity to lead actions.
Love the question. I mean, so first of all, I would like to include measures that are specifically addressing equity. So dedicating a portion of implementation funding that is community-led, that is decided, maybe directed to community-based organizations. I'd love to see that as a policy measure, just as an idea. That wasn't my idea. It was given to me at the BEC conference by one of our community partners. We have indicators, of course, over energy burden, Calvin virus screen, electric vehicle charging infrastructure and where that is, the demands are for lower income or marginalized communities. So those are kind of some examples of data that we have. But please, if you have data sets that we can use that you think are important, let us know. We will be hiring a postdoc in April and graduate students, and we want to investigate these indicators as a priority. There could be many others that I'm not thinking of at the top of my head, but Also, just kind of disparities, distribution, I'm really curious about, and Professor Cameron brought this up to me yesterday on a phone call. Look, what is the reduction potential of marginalized communities versus others? What are the costs? How are the costs, the burdens, the benefits? How is that distribution different from one community to another across California based on certain metrics? A very, I think, relevant topic, and we can have researchers look at that. Also, by making the data available, our research at Cool Climate has been used by hundreds of organizations. Actually, it's over thousands already of organizations that have used our data to publish papers and do their own work. So we're going to be making the data available. Have at it. Incorporate it in ways that you find useful. And we're not the only ones who are going to be analyzing the data.
Yeah, and additionally, those equity indicators will continue to be shaped on a relatively iterative basis, as well as we kind of continue to collect more input and solicit more input from the local governments throughout the state. That's something that we also are trying to build some level of flexibility into the project. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, always happy to hear about what other data sets we could be incorporating and what other considerations we should have in mind as we move through project implementation. We have just a couple of minutes left. It's so many questions. I'll be taking note of all of the questions that we have not been able to get to in the chat, and I'll be developing some answers to those as a part of follow-up. But I think there was one question that we had kind of planned or we had anticipated would come up that I would like us to address before I very quickly close this out. And that is, are you able to get around the 15-15 rule for utility data? And how are you addressing that in the inventories?
Yeah, so we're only able to use the data that the utilities give us, using the 15-15 rule. So we're not able to access, and we're not even asking for data at the meter level. So we have that same limitation, just as your consultants do. However, we can use proxy data, and we're very good at constructing models. And we've been doing this for 20 years to use what information that we have available to fill in gaps or to use reasonable assumptions to fill in data. And we've been doing that quite a bit. However, once you're aggregating to the entire city level, and over years, for example, you might have like industrial emissions might fall off. Okay, we don't have that. But maybe you don't need industrial emissions, or we can use proxy data for industrial emissions for years that you do have. So again, same limitations that you have, we have. But we can also, once we model the change, we can apply that to all jurisdictions using the same assumptions, and just kind of improve the methods over time.
Yeah.
Mia, was that okay of an answer? I know this is an important question for you as well. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, Chris. Apologies to anyone whose question we were not able to get to. Wanted to make sure that we had as much time dedicated as possible. Again, we'll be following up with answers to the questions that we were not able to get to. Thank you all so much. Real quickly, I will just close us out if we can move to the next slide, just flagging a few action items that we will be following up on. So in the coming days, we'll be circulating all of the presentation materials, including the slides, the meeting recording, as well as some overview informational project materials. We'll be following up with all of our emails for anyone interested in getting into more direct contact with anyone on the project team as well. If you are interested in receiving any more additional information about this project, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, John Vandervoort, at jvandervoort@civicwell.org. If you're interested in getting some additional information on the Methodology and Policy Advisory Committee, please do not hesitate to reach out to Mia Kitahara, mia@stopwaste.org, who is leading much of the coordination for that effort. So I just want to say thank you all once more. This was very information dense, just as we wanted it to be, and I really appreciate all of you helping us shape this work at this early stage. More updates are soon to come from all of us. So really, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it, and I'll let everyone go. Just 1 minute past the hour, so thank you all for your patience.